So it's also like quite interesting to see how we kind of go back to those roots that were in ancient times what people believed. And it's really going back to food in a natural form.
I started these conversations to discuss leadership, mentorship, growth, and so much more from voices you may not have heard from before. I hope the conversations inspire you, motivate you, and give you something to think about. This is Leadership in Colour from myself, Shez Iqbal, supported and powered by Mika. Hello, and welcome to the next episode of Leadership in Colour. I'm so happy to be connected today and to have this conversation with Anant Joshi, who I've known for a number of years. He's got a number of roles. So he's a media consultant with a number of ad tech organizations, but he's also, and it's a key part of this conversation today, the founder and host of Plant CEO. Welcome to Leadership in Colour, Anant.
Hey, Shez, how are you doing? Great to be here with you, and thanks for getting me on your show.
Thank you so much for being here. So I want to kick off the conversation the same way I usually kick off this conversation, and that is, tell me about your name. Where does the name Anant Joshi come from?
Yeah, so it actually originates from a Hindu god that was basically it's kind of derived from the word Anand, that means happiness. But Anant with a T is actually a god who is kind of like infinite and endless in its form. So he was the one going through the universe, I guess, but still derived from happiness.
So it's the infinite and universal God, is that right?
Well, kind of like one who is endless.
One who is endless.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
That's a great name.
Yeah. So hopefully being on a plant-based diet would mean I live long.
Yeah, you're sort of giving away all the hooks here, aren't you?
Yeah, I am.
Yeah. But that's a fantastic name. And to think that, your parents would have looked at you, right, and said, This chap here, he looks like an Anant. Like that's such a fantastic, great name to give you. Thank you. I really appreciate you sharing that. So let's kick things off by having a conversation about your career. So can we talk a bit about the early years and what the start of your career looked like?
Very early on, after sort of finishing university, I went into investment management, actually, which was quite interesting, working with different funds and more on the software side of management of those assets, I guess. And then it was kind of the era of the dot-com boom, where obviously a lot of publishers were being formed. And early on, there was a publisher which still exists today in the US. It's called TheStreet.com. It's all about investing and stocks and shares, etc. So I joined their UK division that got formed. So that was the first foray in the early 2000s of getting into the publisher side. So started off with that, then went into a sports publisher called Rivals.net that had many other sites called Football 365, cricket, F1, rugby, etc. So that was when I was looking after research and tech. So that was kind of ad serving technology. So that was, I said, that was a publisher side, first of all. And then I made a switch. I met a guy who was a guy who was bringing a new tech to the market. And it was a technology company around ad serving called iBlaster, which was all about what we called in the time back in the day was rich media. So that's basically ads that stand out, that are very interactive, ones that take your attention. Obviously, attention's a big thing in our industry right now. But that was the early days, if you like, of attention, having these pop-ups and great animations and that sort of stuff, video. So that was iBlaster, and I sort of grew that. I was the first guy in the ground in the UK market, and I was looking after client services. And then I grew that business in about 15 countries internationally. So that's kind of my thing. What I do is take companies that want to expand and I grow them. So that's what I've been doing over the years. So yeah, did that with iBlaster, became MediaMind, then it IPO'd. And then at some stage it got acquired via its many iterations to Amazon and became Seismic. And now they've sort of sunset it after many years because they're changing their model of not getting into ad serving, I guess. So that was the good days of sort of those early days of rich media, and then went into video. So video ad serving with a company called Video Plaza, and that got acquired down the road to Bright Cove, which is a video CMS platform, and then went into verification quite early with a company called Metrix. And Metrix was a Berlin-based startup that was looking at whether ads are actually viewable on your pages. There's a lot of, at the time, obviously, there weren't any of these sort of metrics, and programmatic advertising was rising, but a lot of these ads were being brought were unseen. And then in relation to that was issues around brand safety, product placement against content that you might not want to associate your brand against. And then also to do with ad fraud. So I grew that sort of German company in Europe. It eventually got bought by Double Verify. That's a huge business now around ad verification. And the last few years, I've really been focused quite a lot with a company called Undertone, and Undertone is a company that specializes in high impact advertising. So I kind of now consult with these companies. A lot of it has been around sort of video high impact verification, and also getting into new areas that you're into as well, like retail media. That's a huge market at the moment, as well as CTV and digital out of home and all these channels. So it's basically looking at all these channels that are digital only environments, and seeing how effective and how these companies can grow their market share.
Here's a problem that I usually face. What does your mum say you do?
Oh man, I don't think she knows. Honestly, I think she knows that I work with different tech companies. I'm not sure she would say that I'm in marketing and advertising. I don't think she really asks those questions anymore. She just sees me as her son.
Yeah. Well, there's something sweet about that as well.
And innocent, yeah.
Yeah. But my mum at the beginning, so I kicked off working on ad sales in a B2B publisher group called Euromoney. But it was owned a little bit by Daily Mail. So my mum, I think she told everyone that I was a journalist for Daily Mail.
That's awesome. Yeah. Yeah, maybe not so much, but yeah, I mean, still awesome that she thought you were a journalist.
Yeah. I don't know what she says anymore. What does your wife say you do?
Well, she's kind of knows the industry she used to work for McCann Erickson years ago. So she knows the world of creative, and she worked on helping brands create intranet sites that McCann Erickson would use many years ago. She's now out of that industry altogether. So she knows what I do. So she knows I'm in advertising and in ad tech, and I work a lot with media agencies and brands and publishers and tech companies, and being quite vocal in the industry. So yeah,
it's great. I'm so happy to hear that your wife knows what you do. Just a little note to my wife. Just take notes. But she's not from the industry. Okay, all right. So fantastic. So you've got this great career in ad tech and within the media industry. But the bit that I want to talk to you a little bit about today was your podcast called Plant CEO. Is it fair to call it a podcast? Is your podcast also on YouTube? It's great bit of content there.
Yeah, it's mainly a YouTube show, I would say at first. Okay. So it's definitely a video environment show, and then it also gets exported into audio onto all the podcast platforms. So yeah, so started sort of that journey, if you like, with Plant CEO based on I guess eating habits. So I was raised a vegetarian. Didn't have any sort of eggs. So that's kind of like, you get some vegetarians that would eat eggs. So no fish, no meat, and no eggs. And then about 5 5.5 years ago, I watched a video called Dairy is Scary. And I shared this with you as well, this video. So it's basically like a 5-minute video of the dairy industry. And then I watched this video and I thought, well, I'm consuming a lot of milk and cheese. That's the main thing that I would have in dairy. And it was like, it's not great consuming this. And, as humans, we're the only species that drinks milk from another species, and it's a bit wrong. And then when I watched that video, I started doing more research, watching more documentaries like What the Health, Cowspiracy, Earthlings. There's one called Dominions. There's so many great videos and content out there on Netflix as well. I know we're going to talk about one of them later on, a new one. But yeah, so I started then doing a lot of research into this, and I thought, well, I don't feel comfortable supporting that industry is basically, and normally when people have that sort of insight, they'll probably see it in a few ways. It could be either for the animals, it could be for your own personal health, or it could be for the environment and sustainability. And normally, I guess when it's something that's outside of yourself, like for me personally, it was for the animals. Like I didn't want to see, these animals suffer. Like especially when you look at the dairy industry, cows are basically have to be impregnated for them to give milk. And then their babies are taken away. I think maybe it even happened after I had kids, right? So you have this thing of like the separation between mother and baby. And then these cows have to, for about 3/4 of their life, have to always be pregnant. And so it's a horrible way to live for the cow. But the other side was looking at like, do we actually need to have milk? And like, what's also quite interesting when you look at, the research is to see, well, milk would have high levels of estrogen in it. So as men, even us having like tiny bits of milk over, each day will start to build up, and it basically affects your body. And then it will be like, well, actually, low sperm counts, low and also healthy sperm, if you like, as well. And then for women, the side that's also quite worrying is linking dairy with breast cancer. And then you think, well, do we want to be feeding our kids this way? When effectively you can find many alternatives now on the market, and it's like oat milk and soy milk. So that was my journey, I guess, more on like removing dairy. And then going back to why I started the show was like to bring this awareness. Like you kind of like when you go through a change yourself, you want to tell other people about it. And then I kind of thought about what can I do and what do I enjoy doing? And it's kind of like marketing, right? So in a way, I see this podcast show or vlog, if you like, as a way of speaking to really interesting people and getting their views and for me to be educated. So it's like, well, I want to talk to these interesting people because I want to know myself. So, started the show, and now it's, looking at over, I think, 86 episodes at the latest count. But yeah, everyone from like startups, entrepreneurs, mature companies, film directors, associations, even in the UK, we've had like Deborah Meaden from Dragon's Den. She's been on the show. So there's loads of people, and I want to try and get this as a resource in a way for people to find out more about this subject.
I've got to say that you shared a lot of resource ahead of this conversation, right? So we had the chat earlier in the week, and then you sent me over these videos, and I watched Dairy is Scary, and a fantastic title for a 5-minute video, because you do walk away thinking, geez, dairy is scary. And your point about the fact that these cows are constantly essentially pregnant, or have just given birth, because the milk that they're creating is for their offspring.
Exactly. And then you look at the stats, and the stats are incredible. Like if you look at like how many animals are actually killed from the UN, they're saying 92.1 billion animals are killed for meat. So that that will be cows, chickens, pigs, etc. And that's not including fish. When you look at fish, then it's another 2.7 trillion. That's insane amount of devastation that's happening. And then what's even worse is those animals that are killed, not all of them are actually consumed. So 18 billion go to waste. And that's because they've then effectively suffered for no reason and died for no reason and gone through all these terrible things. That's devastating for the environment, like from an emissions point of view. Then you've got to look at water pollution. Then you've got to look at deforestation, because a lot of the animals are actually being fed things like soya, not to feed humans, but to feed those animals, because of our consumption is just growing, right? So if you look at that animals, and 92.1 billion just on the meat industry, feeding nearly 10 billion people. The numbers are just crazy, and we do that every year. So you can see how it's just causing crazy issues in our world today, and so the food system is broken, basically.
I'm keen to get back onto your vlog. So you mentioned that you'd interviewed some fantastic people. I mean, Deborah Meaden, and there were some others that I listened to, and as you say, 86 episodes. So there's lots of fantastic nuggets there. A few key questions I had. So one was, did you spot any particular trends across the interviews? And also, have you noticed any unique qualities in the leaders that you've interviewed, which you believe are really essential in driving this vegan movement forward?
Yeah, so I think it's quite a varied group of people that I get on the show. Like I always wanted to have it sort of more business, if you like, related, um, and have it as even people, even VCs, for example, coming on the show. So I think you got to kind of follow the money, I guess, in terms of how these companies are getting created. So one thing is always one thing that you see is the passion from these entrepreneurs who are creating these companies, for example. So that's something that you see across the interviews for sure. Also interesting is like how you see, your video looks a lot better now. So yeah, how you see different companies and their stage of growth. So for example, there's some companies that have raised millions based on what they produce, I guess, on the plant-based side, but also looking at things like cultured meat, which is basically taking cells from an animal that doesn't get killed, and it's then grown. So to make it into like what you would call clean meat to some degree, that doesn't have all the antibiotics and that sort of stuff. So they've raised lots of money. So there's people like Josh Tetrick, who's been quite vocal on creating a company called Just Egg and Good Meat. So that's like Just Egg is a product that you can use instead of eggs, that is made of mung beans, very high in protein, and similar sort of versatility in terms of how you make it, if you're making it into, pancakes or scrambled eggs, that sort of stuff. But he's also created a cultured meat company. There's also been associations and seeing how they've started, like Veganuary, for example. Obviously, we're in January now, so that's always interesting to hear their story. And the founder of Veganuary came on the show. And also, it's been quite interesting to meet these people, and I get inspired. So one thing that started to happen is that I meet these startups, and they haven't raised any money, so they even pre-seed. I'll give you one example. There's a guy that I met on a platform called Beyond Animal, and Beyond Animal is kind of like a LinkedIn for the plant-based industry, where companies can find funding, investors can go on this platform, So what happened is I met this guy. He was on this call, and he's a German Nigerian guy who lived in Germany for a while, went back to Lagos with his wife and kids, and he was vegetarian, vegan, I mean, and he couldn't find anything to eat. So his story was that he basically created a cafe, and he came on the call because he wanted to speak to other sort of companies to get insights of where what they were doing. And he created this company called Veggie Victory, which is basically in Africa, the way they consume meat isn't the same way like in Nigeria. You have a lot more stews. You don't necessarily have burgers, right? So you'll have stews. And in the stews would be like beef, for example, or fish. And he created this alternative called V chunks that you can put in a stew and you can flavor it, absorbs the flavor. It's sort of soya and wheat based product, and it gives you sort of that same mouthfeel, if you like. And I thought it was fascinating. And then I interviewed him for the show, came on the show, and I thought, oh, this guy's amazing. I really like what he's doing. I said, well, why don't I give you some money? So I'm going to take my day job money in marketing, in consulting, and I'm going to give you a bit to help you out. Like I want to see you succeed. Because if you look at the population growth in Africa, it will be over, billions by 2050. So it's going to be one of those other countries, China, India, right? A huge population, and plus huge amount of need for protein, right? And also good food. Now, if you look at that market, and if you look at our heritage, our grandfathers and grandmothers ate very differently than we did. We didn't. There was no having meat every single day. It will be an occasional thing. They'll be having rice and beans and all this variety of food. So it's also to try and stop that happening before the big animal farming industry comes into that market. So I gave him some investment. I got another guy involved who actually went on Shark Tank in the US and created a plant-based dog food company called Wild Earth. So he came in, a guy called Ryan Bethencourt. He came on the deal. We both did it together. And then Ryan then created his own fund. He raised more money. And it sort of started a snowball effect just by me meeting him, coming on the show. So that's been quite nice to see that. And he's gone on to raise money now with VCs, and he's growing his business. And yeah, it's fascinating just to see how that business is growing in Nigeria, in that market. And then I started investing in a few more. So it's not like, hey, look, I'm not a millionaire investor like one of the dragons will be, but I would give them a small amount and get them onto the road. Now I can't do so much. What my wife would do, you need to save up now. We need to think about the kids' university. So yeah, good point. I need also some of these to pay back at some point. So now I'm tending not to do so much, but it's also like, what can I do to help those entrepreneurs? So that's been a quite a nice thing to do. I didn't catch everything on your question though, did I?
The question doesn't matter. The story itself was great. I really appreciate it, and actually, it leads me quite nicely onto a question that I did have. And I think you shared some of it there, which is, it looks like there were some changes in your own behavior following some conversations. So for some conversations to make you want to put your hand in your own pocket and invest, that's a huge statement. Were there other moments that made you take a shift in your behavior or make a bit of a seismic change in how you operate?
Yeah, I would say, like, personally, what was interesting, I guess, more recently, I interviewed a Hollywood stuntman who's been in, Marvel films, DC films. He also was like the double for Tarzan, which was, body effectively a stunt and body double for this guy. So he's like pretty built. And I got quite inspired by this guy, Jack. He's originally from Poland. And, the writer's strike was on, so he didn't have much work going on. Now it's come back, which is great for him. And 10 years ago, which is amazing, he decided to go, fully vegan. I was like, wow, that's really, I've been vegan now for about 5 years, right? And he's been vegan for 10 years before it was even popular in like what you could buy. And he basically went through a process of he had a friend who was like kind of into natural, I guess like looking at your body. So like he would say, do a blood test, do a hair tissue analysis, etc., to find out what your body state is at, and then look to change things in your diet. So he went on a meat diet and he found he had high blood pressure. So and he did that for 3 months and then went off that. And then he went on to a pescatarian diet, fish only. He then found that he had high levels of mercury in his system. And then it took him a year to get rid of that mercury. So he went off that. Then he went on to a vegetarian diet, dairy diet, and he found lots of issues with his stomach and his gut. And then he settled on his vegan diet, and now he's for 10 years he's been a vegan stuntman, and when he goes on set, people are like, oh, here comes the vegan guy, but like he's completely built and shredded and everything, and into like doing different movements, because you've got to be able to, like, especially when you look at stuntmen in the UK, you got to be able to do amazing things. You got to be built. You got to be able to swim. You got to drive cars. You got to get on horses. You got to, like, just to be part of the game. Um, so what I learned from him was, like, I'm really into, obviously, finding out about health and nutrition, but also how it affects your body when you're training. So like we spoke about sort of training, bulking, and when he's cutting, for example. So one thing I was quite interested in, because I've was in also take part in amateur dramatics, and I wanted to get in this part, and I had to lose a bit of weight. He's like, what do you need to lose weight? So he was like, well, what you do is basically fasting to some degree, so intermittent fasting. So I'm quite into that, and into water fasts as well. But he'll like have hot water and lemon, like half an hour before he eats, with a little bit of Himalayan salt to activate the minerals. So you'll drink that, and then you wouldn't drink anything with your food. So maybe he was like, skip breakfast, and then for lunch you'll have like a healthy salad, beans, lentils, that sort of stuff. And then an hour and a half later, we'll have again some lemon and hot water, and then we'll have dinner, and that's his meal. So that's kind of like heavy on salads. And when he's bulking, then he'll do heavy on protein, for example. So that makes you sort of lose body fat, which is kind of what we all need to be careful about, because that, body fat, obesity, being overweight leads to many issues to do with heart disease, etc. And we can cover some of that by groups. But yeah, so that definitely inspired me. And that was, just looking at that because I was interested in that topic.
And it feels as though there's a lot of nutritional advice and documentaries that point towards a vegan diet not only being great for your health, but also the environment, right? Like each show seems to really talk about how you can recover better, or you can get all your protein from a better source. The show that you referenced earlier, that I'm keen to talk about, is currently out on Netflix, and it's called You Are What You Eat. It's that study on 22 pairs of identical twins conducted by Stanford Medicine. And one twin is given a vegan diet and the other one's on an omnivore diet, and it's over 8 weeks. In all honesty, I don't know about you, but I was surprised by the results. And for anyone who hasn't seen the show, spoiler alert, because we're going to spill it all here. But the results were great, right? Like, so some of the ones that I remember was the reduction in LDC, which is bad cholesterol, in the vegan twin versus the omnivore one. But HDL, good cholesterol, I think that also decreased, but just not as much in the vegan person, from what I remember. The vegan twin usually lost more muscle mass, but both groups lost weight in general. And from what I gathered, the vegan person essentially could afford to eat more. I mean, the reason why they lost muscle mass was they just weren't eating enough. I think they were sort of used to different portions. So is it the same filmmaker from Game Changer? Is that right?
Yeah. So Louis Fasoyas was the same director, and he's actually come on the show as a past guest. And we spoke about his his film career, and so that's definitely one to watch. He will come back again, but he's got extremely busy filming, and he got inundated with requests about the show. So, um, but yeah, in general, what do I think? I think yeah, the results showed what happened. I was kind of surprised, first of all, that it had an effect in 8 weeks, right? And quite amazing. Like, but I would really like to see what happens long term to these twins, right? Especially the ones that continue this dietary change. But the one that really you've mentioned already, those few things that stood out. So visceral fat, which is fat around your organs, just started to melt away with some of these twins. It's like, well, that's quite amazing. That's the danger fat. You don't want fat around your organs. You mentioned about the longevity side, and that was something which I learned about on the show. Actually, I didn't know about this, but at the ends of your DNA, you have these telomeres, and as you age, they started to decrease, and they kind of protect your DNA. And on the vegan diet, they started to extend. So you're basically, your biological age becomes younger. So you're actually becoming younger with this, and that point is really important. There's also another documentary. I don't know if you've seen it. It's called Live 100, and it's around what happens in these places in the world called blue zones, which is different places like Okinawa, for example. There's one where people are living to 100, Sardinia. There's a place in California, and they're looking at these groups of people and like, what are these old people doing, and how comes they're so active, and really importantly, why they're so healthy in their age? Because we see like our generation, they're getting old, but they also have issues. They have heart disease, they have dementia, they have Alzheimer's, they've got type 2 diabetes. With these people who are living to 100, are healthy, they're active in their community, they're doing things, they're gardening, they're dancing, they're laughing, but also they looked at their diet. 99% of them are on a plant-based diet. So there's definitely something in it where these people are doing something different. They're living longer. And you can see these things starting to reverse, right? So I'll give you one story of like in the show, in the twin experiment show, You Are What You Eat, was the mayor of New York, the first African American mayor of New York, Mayor Eric Adams. He woke up one morning and he found that he couldn't see properly. He had stuff in his eyes. He went to the doctors, and the doctors did all these checks on him, and they found out that he basically had type 2 diabetes. And the doctor said, well, these tingling feelings in your toes and your fingers means that you're going to lose those. You're going to have to be on insulin for the rest of your life. And he gave him this leaflet and he said, living with type 2 diabetes. He goes, nah, that's not my destiny. And then he just looked online. He said, reversing type 2 diabetes. So then he found this Dr. Michael Greger, which was basically runs this site called nutritionfacts.org. And he's written a number of great books, How Not to Die, How Not to Age, those sort of books. And he discovered that you can basically reverse type 2 diabetes by going on a plant-based diet. And that's basically a whole food plant-based diet. So he did that, went back to his doctor, came back with his medicine and goes, I didn't use this medicine. I just went, and he said, that was incredible. So there's definitely things that you can reverse. I'll give you another example, actually. It was quite fascinating as well. When you look at sort of ethnic groups, obviously within our ethnic groups, heart disease is the biggest killer, right? And when you look at things like Alzheimer's, very high for women, for example. But what's interesting, it's lower in our community, and what I realized is there could be links to something as simple as turmeric. So turmeric is basically anti-inflammatory, and when you get Alzheimer's, you actually have this protein, which is effectively, let me see if I've got it here on my notes. Yeah, it's called amyloid, and amyloid basically builds up and it basically forms plaque in your brain. So you got like very tiny blood vessels going inside your brain, and when it blocks it up, then you get Alzheimer's that can lead to dementia. Now, when you have like turmeric, and inside turmeric is curcumin, that basically joins to that amyloid, and it basically removes that, and doesn't make it form into that disease. Now, in our community, we do have people who have dementia, but having turmeric. So, and this is like been in our culture for years. And now what's trending is having a turmeric and a ginger shot, for example. But we've known it for centuries, having this ability to have this spice. So it's also like quite interesting to see how we kind of go back to those roots that were in ancient times what people believed. And it's really going back to food in a natural form. And also, like, when you look at it going back to the natural form in America, the African Caribbeans community is the highest trending group of people who are going vegan. And it's not new to them because they've been eating this way for a while. And so you can see this effect, but there's still issues with diet. And when you look at different communities with things like fast food, fried food is leading to all these things around obesity, and heart diseases, etc.
I didn't realize that African Americans were the leading group to make the switch to vegan food, or participate in the vegan movement. And the reason why I say that is because going back to Eric Adams. So I read up about him a little bit more, and there was this story that he shared, which was essentially we're passing type 2 diabetes down the line. And he wasn't talking about the bloodline. He wasn't talking about genetics. He was saying literally he could see mothers handing recipes down to their daughters, and it was for, fried chicken or pork and gravy or whatever it is. And it's, what gets covered off in this group called soul food. But that soul food was essentially the ability to make something, a delicacy out of the food that was available when they were living on the plantations. So there is this issue. And there's definitely something in, when you talk about our community, you talk about the South Asian community, where we have some food types. So amongst Pakistanis, for example, we've got nihari, which is like lamb stew, right? And it's very, very heavy meat lamb stew. And we've got some, we're famous for some chicken curries and what have you. But we do have a lot of lentils and kidney beans. There's lots of pulses and wheats as well. But some of those meals are just not healthy. Let's put it that way, right? Yeah. And we're passing that down from one to the other.
Completely, yeah. And what you said there in the beginning is like, it's definitely you're passing it down because food is cultural, right? And it's family. It's what brings people together. It's emotional, right? And but the problem is these recipes are leading to poor health outcomes. Like in the US, for example, if you're male and you're 55 years old, 90% you're going to have heart disease, which is an incredible stat, right? It's just nuts. It's like standard American diet is leading these terrible health outcomes. And if you look at it from the culture side, yeah, people get used to how you're brought up in that way. But also, it never used to be this way, which is kind of like going back to the point, like we weren't eating like in Pakistan or India or Africa. We were eating a lot of rice, pulses, fruits, vegetables. We weren't necessarily eating meat 3 times a day that then clogs you up, stays in your colon, and gives you cancer. We weren't eating this way. And it's like, it's kind of frustrating when I see this happening and you think, well, just need to change. But it's also like having that food that's accessible for these communities that might be deprived because supermarkets haven't invested in those areas. So a lot of these people now taking it in their own hands, creating their own gardens, right? Growing their own fruit and vegetables. And that's what's also key to educate people. And going back to Eric Adams, what he's also done just in New York, has gone into the state hospitals where basically 1% were basically just eating plant-based food. He's now changed that where plant-based is a default at 50%. So in a similar way, imagine you go into hospital and you've got lung disease because of smoking. And then part of your food, they give you cigarettes. Here you go. Here's some cigarettes. So it's just making it worse. So in the same way. So that's what I really fascinating to see now, like how hospitals need to catch up with what's happening around the world, like getting this message of like healthy eating and having more plants in your life. And it's also like super important at universities to know this. So there's a number of universities that are coming out and doing plant-based meals now, and having that as an option because of the effects to your health and the environment. So it does come down to education and how you're bringing up kids as well. That's kind of vital. That's kind of what we all need to be focused on, like the next generation. We can't just leave it up to them. Having said that, a lot of Gen Zs, a lot of millennials, if you just look at the UK, for example, 1.1 million people between 2003 and 2024 turn vegan. So now you're looking at 2.5 million people in the UK that are vegan. And a fifth of those people are actually also like 20% are actually in London. So there's a lot of people in London. 1 in 5 people are vegan in London, which is amazing, or meat-free, so to speak, in London. So if we continue this trend, we'll definitely start to see a difference. Now, there's an important thing. You can have vegan food that is unhealthy, or you can adopt a whole food plant-based diet that's healthy, right? So you want to be eating food in its natural form. So like, fresh fruit and vegetables, beans, legumes, grains, ancient grains. You want to be eating the healthy stuff. If you're going to choose to go to a fast food restaurant and have a burger, make sure it's the burger that doesn't have cholesterol. So you can get a Beyond Meat burger that will have fiber, more fiber, because the meat burgers won't have fiber, and no cholesterol. Yeah, it might have other things that are slightly higher, but given the choice of two, you're better off having the meat-free one, right? So these things that we know, and we do have to, obviously you need to go with, how people want to eat. And, I would say like to start with, it's kind of like have a look at what you're eating in your shopping and then look to replace one item that you're having a lot of, like meat-wise. And then in a week, have one plant-based meal. If you're able to do so. And that's like cooking it at home, making it yourself. If you're having ready meals, if you're maybe older and you don't have the capabilities, then pick a plant-based meal, instead. So it's like, just do that. And then the more you do it, the more you learn about this, the food and the nutrition and the benefits and the health outcomes that you'll get.
I think that's fantastic advice. It's great takeaways there. Before we wrap up, I just wanted to ask you a little bit about what's going on with you in your day job. What's keeping you up at night?
Yeah, so still consulting, like in this area of ad tech and digital, and seeing quite a lot in terms of what's happening in the industry for CTV and retail media. Still focused on that. That's the day job. That's how I earn a living. And then I guess to Plant CEO, what keeps me up is like, I don't think I'm doing enough. Like it's great when I get to speak to people, and thanks again for having me on your show. And it's like, I speak to all these wonderful people and I think, oh, what else can I do? So thinking, do I need to do some more that gets more traction, like to different groups of people? because I want this content to be accessible for different types of. Because I went on a journey, right? Like cheese was one that I had to give up, and cheese has got this thing called casein in it that makes it very addictive. So the best thing is just to stop eating cheese, and then you won't crave it. It's like an addiction. Um, so everyone is in their own journey, and it's like also what I've learned is that you can't be judgy when you're talking about this. You've got to lead with the science and lead with research and let people find their own way. It also came to like how I chose the name of the show, because I could have called it Vegan CEO, but a lot of people these days have a negative connotation with what that means. So that's why I call it Plant CEO. So with Plant CEO, I want to make it more accessible, want to grow the channel. Also thinking of, helping different brands. So like in my day job at the moment, we've been helping Beyond Meat, which is amazing. They've been growing phenomenally well in Europe with campaigns on CTV and talking about sustainability. So I did some campaign work for them. And with Plant CEO, I was thinking, what else can I do? Like perhaps I need to create some additional video content, maybe helping some corporates around that. So it's something that I'm considering at the moment, maybe creating some short films. But that's obviously still the passion project. So that's kind of is what worries me, is that I don't feel that we're adopting to this fast enough. That's kind of what keeps me up.
I think if anything is proven from the recent trends, and when I say recent trends, I'm saying that sort of like last 3, 4, 5 years, you can create a lot of content on this and it will be consumed. This is a subject matter that we're all still really interested in learning more about. And it's just super interesting. Again, if you go back to Game Changers and the fact that gladiators were consuming more plant-based than meat, that's a bit of an eye-opener. I don't think that there were a lot of negative connotations to people who are opting for a salad or plant-based diet versus a steak, right? In terms of how masculine that person was. I don't know if those connotations still ring true. I don't know if people still think that way, or at least the mass majority.
I mean, 100%. I mean, and just to clarify that, you're talking about not the Gladiators, the new show. You're talking the TV show. You're talking about Roman gladiators, which was in the documentary, right? And so they did. Like, I mean, and it's amazing because I don't know if you remember the scene in the Game Changers where they feed some these college students a beef burrito, a chicken burrito, and then a bean burrito, and then they do the blood samples taken. You can see the fat in their blood, which will slow down and give them things like inflammation, and then also causes heart disease and stuff like that. So having that explained in that visual way and seeing it in actual blood samples after you've eaten is kind of like a realization, isn't it? It's just like, it's crazy. And then going back to the connotations, that people think that you can't be strong, but you can be very strong on a plant-based diet. If you look at elephants, for example, right, and gorillas, so some of the biggest species in the world are so strong. So there's a lot of stuff to be done on the negative PR side. I think there's a lot of misinformation happening from the meat industry that's very much ingrained with pushing a different agenda because of money. Also within governments, which is quite, they spend so much money doing lobbying. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done on that side. And I think definitely the younger generation are seeing it differently and are adopting to this faster. And that's what we need to focus on for sure.
So my closing tradition is to allow the guests to name the episode. So you can name this conversation.
Please don't let me do that. That's so difficult. Okay, I'll give you one. It's a tricky one because it might not be seen great. So my dad always used to say a phrase to me, and I don't know what I want to debate this with you. We want to see what you think.
Go on.
He said, "Your stomach isn't a graveyard for dead animals."
Mate, I think that's brilliant. I think that's brilliant. That is the right level of clickbait. Okay.
So I think that's that. I will go with my dad's wisdom.
You know, it's funny because I recently spent a lot of time with my brother. We went away with each other, and we started to eat a lot of meat on this trip. And he actually woke up one day and he said, "I feel a little bit rubbish. My stomach is a graveyard for dead animals."
No way.
He actually used that phrase. And
Wow.
I thought he was being a little bit over dramatic at that point because we just had one extra whatever it was than normal. But yes, you're right though. It's a phrase that definitely rings true.
Yeah.
And there should be more consideration about what it is that you're putting in your stomach, and actually how long it stays in your stomach, right?
Oh, 100%. And because meat is very dense,
Yeah.
and when you consume it, it stays in your body. It takes a lot of time for your body to digest it and come out the other end. And actually, one thing that we didn't touch on in You Are What You Eat was they some of the twins they lost the muscle mass, and that was because the veg are less dense, so you need to consume a lot more. So I actually worked with this guy, the one of the guys on there who's the vegan bodybuilder guy, Nimai Delgado, and you have to consume a lot more veg and food quantity wise when you want to bulk. So you got to consume a lot more compared to meat to get that same level of outcome that if you want to grow muscle, for example. So that's an important point. But yeah, I mean, it's your brother saying that is kind of it's weird how the universe works.
It is weird. So I would say a few final things. So one is if you haven't seen the Netflix show, watch the Netflix show. There are lots of other shows that we mentioned as well. I can put them in the notes. If you haven't listened to or watched Plant CEO, do. It's brilliant. I've watched a few episodes myself. 86 episodes there, so there's lots of content there to get through. It's fantastic. And I really appreciate you joining me today. Thank you so much.
Thank you again, Shez, and great to be on the show. Thanks very much, and keep what you're doing. It's amazing.
Thank you.